Monologues can be incredibly fun and rewarding to work with. They can also be pretty intimidating because they're long and you're on your own with no one to help you. And because directors are cruel and unusual, they usually want one for an audition. Monologues have made a resurgence in past decades. After going out of fashion for a little while, we remembered that theater is a primarily auditory medium, and they are back, all over the place. In fact, every single Still Small project, with the exception of Perpetua, has had monologues in it. So if you want to work with us, in fact, if you want to work anywhere in theater, you kind of need to know how to do them. So we are going to blast through and attempt to scratch the surface today because there are so many useful tools for monologues. The first thing that you're going to want to do is determine what type of monologue you're working with. Is it poetic, like Shakespeare, or is it completely natural? The TV show This Is Us has done an incredible job with that over the past couple of years, because sometimes in real life somebody really does talk for a long period of time. No pointing fingers here. And sometimes it's going to be addressed to a person, and sometimes it's going to be a soliloquy. A soliloquy is a monologue where the actor is talking to him or herself or to the audience with the understanding that we're getting a peek inside that character's head. Sometimes you've got kind of a hybrid between addressing to a person and being a soliloquy, because sometimes they're talking to a person who's not visible on stage. For instance, they may be rehearsing an argument, they may be reminiscing to a dead loved one. That's actually what we've got going on with the monologue we're using today. Most of the monologues in All Heaven Broke Loose are soliloquies. This one is a prayer. So those are the things you want to determine: how heightened or realistic it is, because you're going to use a lot of the same techniques, but you'll use them a little differently, and whether or not there's a tangible person to talk to. So the first tool we have to work with, you can score your monologue just the same way you'd score a scene. You don't have to, but it does help to lend shape and direction to your monologue. The monologue that we're working with today comes from the middle of All Heaven Broke Loose. It's spoken by Mary, Jesus' mother, on the day after Jesus is crucified. One of the other characters has mentioned that since those events, she's been able to do nothing but sleep. And this is the first time we see her in Act 2 trying to process what has just happened. Again, there's no one right answer to scene scoring, but here's what we're going to work with for this. In the beginning of the monologue, she's laying out the facts so she can figure out what to make of them. In the middle, she's trying to build them together into something logical. And at the end, well, there are a number of options. It could be just to grieve. But again, the less noble is usually the more interesting choice, and the more conflict, the more we have to work with. So simply for the sake of making a strong choice, we're going to go with the intention to accuse God. The next thing we want to look at is establishing foci. Important ideas and people are given a physical place or focus, and that helps the audience follow a character's train of thought and again lends shape to the monologue. This can still happen in a very realistic monologue where you're talking to a specific person. After all, you don't make eye contact the entire time you're talking to somebody. If you're in a hurry, maybe you're glancing at the clock a lot. You might even place specific ideas and people. If you're at home but arguing about work, you might gesture towards your workplace while you're arguing. But in soliloquies, foci become especially important because you're all alone on stage and your job is to pull the audience into your interior world of abstract words and ideas. So in this monologue that we're working with, there are several important ideas and people. There's God. There is the past, where she has witnessed mysterious and miraculous things. There are her other children who've played an important role in sowing doubt in her mind. And there is what has just happened, the unimaginable torture and execution of her son, which drives this entire monologue. So you can choose where you want your foci for any number of reasons. For this, we're going to put God vaguely up. Makes sense, right? We're going to put the holy past on a diagonal in this direction. We're going to put her other kids, and importantly, the doubt that they have planted on a diagonal in this direction. And the current events that are dominating her thought are going to be right here, front and center in the foreground. We're going to highlight these foci in our script to give us general reminders of where those ideas become prominent. So, she starts by talking to God and immediately starts pulling out these memories. Her memories then switch to these troubling ones of her kids. You see her focus starting to shift back to the past, but then she interrupts herself before she actually gets there and returns to the doubt that's been sown. In the second beat, The reason that she's trying to put the pieces together is this terrible event in the foreground. And she starts stacking up elements from the far past and from her kids to build up to this question, where is God? And she wrestles with God about this issue in the foreground. In the final beat, we've again got this current issue and these clues from the past, and although it doesn't specifically return to the subject of God, that question of why implies God as a final focus. And especially because the intention that we chose is the intention of accusing God, that also very much indicates God as a strong choice for that final focus. Okay, now we get to do some nitty-gritty text work. And the first tool you get to work with here is the sounds of your words. I could tell you an entire story just with vowel sounds. Aww. Ah. 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 Ooh. Vowels carry emotion, and consonants help you shape and punctuate that emotion. Think of the word dead. We usually just slide over it, but if you use both of those Ds, dead, it has this thud to it. And consonants that have that heavy or hard sound to them, Ks, Ps, Ds, Ts, those are going to lend some fantastic snap and weight to your words. Fricatives, sounds like S and F that kind of slide, they can be used to make something sound really gentle, like in the Glass Menagerie, a little silver slipper of a moon. Or they can be spat out with contemptuous disgust, like in Hamlet, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. In poetic monologues, the sounds of words becomes especially important because poetry is about experiencing the sounds of language as an art form in their own right. But even the most realistic monologue, your sounds are going to be incredibly important because dramatic language is never just about carrying information. It's about carrying emotion and personality. Playwrights are also going to give you clues in the text to work with. And the moral of the story with that is pay attention. Pay attention to punctuation. It was originally invented for actors, and I promise you the playwright put it there for a reason. So punctuation is our first clue to pay attention to. Dashes, ellipses, commas, they all mean something to the rhythm and timing of how something comes out, which says something about what's going on for a character. In poetic monologues, you're going to look at it almost like you'd look at music. Commas, semicolons, periods, you're going to almost treat them like different length rests in musical notation. In more realistic monologues, it's going to give you clues about the rhythms of a person's thought, where they rush ahead, where they hesitate, where they interrupt themselves, and why. A related clue is the length of words and sentences. You'll see Shakespeare use this a lot. He'll have this sentence that's clipping along with all these one-syllable words, and then you hit this like 17-syllable word, and it hits like a brick wall. More modern writers might use different length words, occasionally sprinkling in a well-chosen long word, but they're more often going to use the lengths of sentences. If you have these long, flowing, or meandering sentences, a really short sentence gets your attention. So both punctuation and the lengths of words and sentences help you with the very important task of pacing, finding the places to speed up, slow down, and even stop altogether that keep the energy up and keep the audience engaged. Writers are also going to give you clues to emphasis. In poetic works, they're often going to rely on the rhythm of the poetry to do this. So in the show As You Like It, Phoebe is a little bit shallow and she's talking about this guy she likes and doesn't want to admit she likes, and she has the line, "It is a pretty youth, not very pretty." Now Shakespeare writes in iambic pentameter, so the line is 10 beats long and every even beat is emphasized. It is a pretty youth, not very pretty. Right there in the rhythm of the line, he's given you how it's meant to be spoken. It is a pretty youth, not very pretty. In poetic monologues, the rhythm of the poetry and the times when the rhythm is interrupted, either by an extra beat or the emphasis falling on the wrong beat, those are going to give you clues for emphasis. In more modern works, a playwright is more often going to use italics for the same purpose. And again, they give you clues that go way beyond one line and tell you what's happening for a character. In the show Our Town, there's a single italicized word that's the key to the entire monologue. Emily's mother is crying on Emily's wedding day, and she has this monologue that starts with, "I don't know why on earth I should be crying." She's dealing with the weirdness of how bittersweet weddings can be, the fact that there's real loss and fear involved, but it feels a little wrong to her to admit it because she's supposed to be happy for her daughter. So she's been talking about how hard it was for her to hold herself together that morning. And then she says that Emily put her head on the table and she cried. Now, I've heard some really good actors completely miss the point of this monologue, saying something like, and she cried, so that when you get to the ending of the monologue, where Mrs. Webb says, the whole world's wrong, that's what's the matter, it's this big declaration, and a kind of feminist declaration, because the monologue talks about certain taboos that were unfair to girls. But that's not what's in the text. The text is, and she cried. What you've got is a woman who's never had her emotions validated, who feels like she's being silly, whose attempts to hold herself together are being thwarted by the fact that her daughter is being just as emotional and silly. That makes her final line, oh, the whole world's wrong, that's what's the matter, this dismissal of her confusion and this invalidation of the uncomfortable emotions she's experiencing. And because she can't see that they're valid, but the audience can, it makes the feminist implications of the monologue that much stronger. But you're going to miss all of that if you don't pay attention to what's italicized and what's not. So I realize this is a ton to pay attention to. Here's a quick summary of what we're looking at in text work. Although there's overlap between these uses, the first helps you really dig into expressing emotion, and the three that follow are largely about pacing and emphasis. Let's look at this briefly with Mary. In our first paragraph, we've got a lot of soft and gentle sounds, S's that give you a whisper, L's and R's that have a lilt to them. We have this gentle beginning as she brings out these vulnerable memories, and as she tests out whether her own fragility is going to hold up after spending all day literally incapacitated by grief. And then we get these harder sounds, dignity, country, as she talks about what she gave up. She does have a backbone, and what she did back then showed real strength of character. In the second paragraph, we suddenly get these really hard sounds, all really close together. Can't take, can't take. There's a desperation and a pain and even a fierceness that comes when we really use those C's and K's and T's. Now, we've been mostly talking about consonants so far. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of really interesting vowels we've got. Most of the time, we associate the long vowels, O, Ah, E, with pain. So lengthening the don't understand can be a really good choice. But short vowels, can express pain in a very different way. Those are your sort of punched in the gut vowels. Don't understand can really express that pain in a very different way when you're in so much pain you can barely get the words out. Helpfully, we've been given this phrase twice, so we can actually use both of those if we want to. And then we've got this very nice short word in a time of extreme pain, thing. The TH lets you spit it out, the short I punches you in the gut with it, and the G stops you at the end. So this little word, thing, actually becomes one with great punch. Looking briefly at our other clues, you've got two italicized words. What was all of that? You've got her bewilderment. And if that all meant something, which sums up everything she's just recounted so she can get to her next thought. But both of these italicized words also challenge the value of what she's recounted. You don't say all of that flippantly about things you know to be holy and special. She's asking if it meant something or didn't, and by saying all of that, she's subtly challenging God to give her an answer. And then you've got a couple of short sentences that stand out among these longer ones. I don't understand. Boom, short. And then especially after these long flowing sentences about Simeon in the temple and what she wishes she could have done, we have this final super short, but I don't know why. Okay, that's a ton of things to bear in mind. How do we keep them all straight? Well, I find it helpful to mark up my script and then use that while I'm memorizing, because then I memorize all of the techniques that I want to use right in there with the words. I also find it really helpful to reformat the script. Here's why. First of all, you need some room to make all your notations. Second, typing it out or writing it out helps you memorize. And third, putting one sentence or one idea per line also helps you memorize. If I format it like this, I can practice line by line, and when I'm getting really into the thick of memorizing, I'll write myself out a 1 or 2 word clue for each line and work from that. If I have an index card with angel, losing, strange, sure, I can clue myself through that whole first paragraph without it feeling overwhelming. So what I might end up with is something like this, which I realize looks the opposite of not overwhelming. Obviously, if you're trying to read this while performing it, you're going to get lost. That's why this is something you work through slowly while you're digesting and memorizing. And then when you're working it up on its feet, you hopefully have it in your head enough that you don't have to look at this chicken scratch. But if you look at this quickly, we've got some of our sounds marked, either with capital letters or in some cases tiny letters. We've got our foci highlighted. We've got our important italicized lines and short lines underlined. If we had about 4 more years and we're doing this on real paper, I'd probably have circled some of the important commas and periods. However you want to mark up your script is up to you. Now here's how this monologue might look if we were doing it with all of these tools we just talked about.
Adonai, when I was a girl, I saw your angel and I believed what he said. Your miracles carried me through losing my family, losing my dignity, losing my country. I believed. And then things got strange and my other kids were saying things and I forgot. Well, no, but I stopped being so sure. And now, I can't take that. I can't take not knowing. Because if he was right, I'm a terrible mother to ever think he was crazy. And if he was wrong, then what was all of that when I was younger? And if that all meant something, then where are you? How could that all end like this? I don't understand. I just don't understand. All I know is I would have given anything to trade places with my baby boy, and I couldn't do a thing. And I know that years ago, that old man in the temple told me a sword would pierce my soul. But I don't know why.